Hello to each one of you, wherever you are, and thank you for joining us here at IDLO for this really important conversation on the impact of COVID-19 on trafficking in persons. With me, I have a distinguished panel of experts that are going to share regional perspectives on efforts by different first responders to combat trafficking in persons. I will be introducing them shortly. So we will have Professor Joy Ngozi Elioza, the Professor and Dean Faculty of Law at the University of Nigeria in Enugu State. She's also a former Special Rapporteur on trafficking in persons, especially for women and children, and her mandate was 2008 to 2014. She's a member of the UN Civil Society Advisory Board on Prevention of Sexual Exploitation and Abuse. She's a founding director for Women's Aid Collective and chairperson of the Sexual Assault and Referral Network in Nigeria. Professor, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll also be hearing from the regional advisor, ECOWAS, Mr. Olatunde Olayemi. ECOWAS is the economic community for West African states, and he heads the Regional Trafficking in Persons program. Mr. Olatunde is an expert in law, criminology, security studies, and strategic management. He's been doing this work for over 20 years, so he gets it. And Olatunde, we are glad to have you on the panel today. Agnes Igoye, for our partners in East Africa, she is no stranger. She has been doing work around trafficking in persons and immigration for a very long time, 20 years plus. She has provided expertise on trafficking and immigration issues to institutions including the UNODC, UNDP, IOM. She was on an ILO webinar yesterday. She's a member of the Clinton Global Initiative with a commitment of action on trafficking in persons, and the founder of Hearts for Peace, a program which works to rebuild war-torn communities. Agnes, you know I'm your fan, and it's glad to have you on the panel today. From Liberia, and I'm coming to you live from Monrovia, we have the Deputy Minister, Ministry of Labor, Phil Dixon. The Ministry of Labor chairs the National Task Force on Trafficking in Persons here in Liberia. He's the technical lead on TIP interventions here in Liberia, and he supports the Secretariat in coordinating TIP efforts and leading on strategic national anti-trafficking in persons interventions. Deputy Minister, we know you're a very busy person, so thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Lastly, and in no means the least, is Anthony Margaret Nigba. She's the director of Her Voice Liberia. Her Voice is a civil society organization that is leading in advocacy work which focuses on promoting women empowerment and increasing access to justice for women through its legal aid initiative. Her Voice has done extensive work, grassroots-driven initiatives in poor and vulnerable communities, and works closely with several courts in Liberia to assist vulnerable people to understand their legal rights in order to access justice. That is a distinguished panel of experts, and I know it's going to be a very interesting conversation. In terms of basics, at the bottom of your screen, wherever you're joining us from, we will be receiving your questions and comments in two modes. There's a Q&A tab. If you have questions, you can click on it and share your questions with us, or you can click on the chat tab and also share your questions or your comments. To start off our webinar today, our regional program manager for IDLO, who provides strategic direction on the work we're doing here in Africa, is going to make a few remarks. Mr. Romaldo, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Dora. Allow me to say that you've been able to put together a very eminent panel today. And I want to start off by thanking all the participants who have joined us this afternoon, starting with Deputy Minister Dixon, who I had the opportunity to meet when I came to Liberia It's good to see you on the panel again, Deputy Minister. All the esteemed colleagues from Nigeria and from East Africa, we certainly do welcome you as IDLO. Allow me to say very few words as we start this really important webinar conversation that we're going to have today. IDLO is, as you all know, an intergovernmental organization. We work to empower people to be able to realize their rights, support law reform, so that the laws and policies are fair and that institutions are able to be effective, and also that they are able to be accountable, as well as accessible to the people, the generality of the people. At IDLO, when we talk about human trafficking, we realize that this is a practice that constitutes one of the most acute challenges to the rights and dignity of an individual. In as much as it is outlawed by several international treaties and conventions, the unfortunate bit is we still do experience it, and experience it in quite a substantive way in most of the countries that we work in, as well as that we come from. So what is important to us is that beyond the legislation, beyond the frameworks that are there, we need to have an open conversation about how we can ensure that we stop trafficking in persons. As IDLO, we believe that building the capacity of the justice sector is critical to be able to respond to the challenges of trafficking in persons. And in this regard, this webinar is very opportune. It comes at a time when the global community, as we all know, commemorates the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. And the fight in trafficking in persons significantly is also part of the SDGs, as we all know. And it calls upon, SDG 16.2 calls upon member states to end abuse, exploitation, trafficking in persons, and violence and torture against children and women. The theme for 2020 is very opportune, particularly given the time that we are in. The theme for 2020 speaks to a commitment to the cause, working on the front line to end trafficking in persons. And the role in this regard that first responders play is absolutely critical. And when we talk about the first responders, obviously we are thinking about our police officers, our immigration officers, prosecutors, medical personnel, people who really are the first line of interface with victims of trafficking in persons. And we do realize that it is very important to appreciate the work they do. And certainly this webinar, as we will hear from the esteemed participants, seeks to discuss the issues and to realize to what extent we can support the first responders and to what extent we can build the capacity so that we certainly do enhance our ability to ensure that trafficking in persons is reduced and, if anything, brought to an end. The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly had an effect in the manner in which we combat, or efforts to combat trafficking in persons are handled. It has reshaped and to some extent shifted some of the gains. What we do realize is, obviously, due to the nature of the pandemic, governments all over have been forced to put in place restrictions to ensure that the pandemic does not spread. As these restrictions are put in place, unfortunately, this has also ensured that there is a limitation on the work that the frontline personnel can do with respect to trafficking in persons. To an extent, it has literally driven the whole practice of trafficking in persons deep down to a point where we are not essentially able to see or to explore and be able to know what exactly is happening. I am hopeful that part of the conversations today will be looking at and giving us an opportunity to reflect on some of the comparative experiences across our jurisdictions from Nigeria, from East Africa, and indeed from other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, to see to what extent we are able to reduce trafficking in persons, to basically look at what has been the impact of COVID-19, and to then also discuss what have been the lessons that have been put in place or that we have been able to learn from as we combat trafficking in persons. What are the national and regional good practices that we can emulate? How can we replicate them in Liberia so that certainly we continue to see improvements? And I do note that there has been quite a lot of improvement recently in terms of the watch list for Liberia, and I'll leave it to colleagues to speak more to that. I'm sure they will certainly do that during this conversation. So I don't want to go too much into specifics. I want to basically say, I am certain that this panel that we have today will be able to do justice to the issues at hand. As IDLO, we remain very committed to be working on issues around trafficking in persons. We remain very committed to ensuring that people, wherever they are able to have their dignity respected and to have their right to participate within the spaces that they are in a manner that is free from abuse and free from such heinous practices such as trafficking in persons. With those words, I want to hand back to you, Dora, and I do certainly wish good deliberation, and I look forward to hearing a lot more of the specifics, the numbers, how the statistics are working out, and certainly to look at what has been our specific contributions, and as I said, what have been the key lessons learned that we can build upon moving forward. I want to stop there and say thank you very much for this opportunity, and let us enjoy this conversation.
Thank you very much, Romaldo. Professor Ezeilo, I will start with you. Like Romaldo has said, the global pandemic of COVID-19 has reshaped, altered, and in a very negative way impacted the work that many stakeholders in different jurisdictions have been doing on combating trafficking in persons. I speak to the theme, the 2020 theme, that is really looking to recognize the role that first responders are playing in supporting initiatives around trafficking in persons, even during this very difficult time. Police officers, immigration officers, labor inspection officers, civil society, health workers, people in the transport industry are very important as first responders. But I also read your 2009, 2012 reports while you were still the UN Special Rapporteur. And I recognize that some of the issues that you raised at that time with regard to how to enhance and support first responders in responding to trafficking in persons interventions are still very relevant 10 years down the road. So could you speak to us about what you see as some of the regional trends and strategies that are being adopted by first responders in combating trafficking in persons, especially for women and children who are the bigger percentage of victims, and what governments and civil society actors need to know and what they need to do, especially in this global pandemic?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm glad that you're organizing this. And in particular, the theme of this year's World Day Against Trafficking is particularly interesting, because I recall I spent quite a lot of my time and energy as I traversed the world, and there was no region of the world I didn't go on a mission or conference or consultation or expert meeting. And it was always something that stared me in the face. And it was something that increasingly I was finding difficult to get states to take accountability and to let state know that these are their obligations based on even international normative or even regional frameworks that they are state parties to. Because we have to go back exactly to, this year is actually 20 years of adoption of the UN trafficking protocol. That's the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons. And if you look at the Article 2, it is quite specific in terms of what should be the role of state parties and actually the frontline officers, including civil society. One, and it's unique because it's just one of those few laws that will set out their purpose. So it said, to prevent and combat trafficking in persons, paying particular attention to women and children. Two, to protect and assist victims of such trafficking with respect to their full human rights. And thirdly, to promote cooperation among state parties in order to meet those objectives. Very clear. And if we always advert our mind to that, in conjunction with other provisions like Article 6 that deal with protection and assistance, Article 8 that deal with safe reparation, Article 10 and all of that, then in fact the entire protocol. And when it comes to the issue of who is a first responder, who are they, you have articulated it. But I think what we always do, and I'm very glad that you mentioned the labor inspector, because we always forget that they are first responders. And I recall cases where they mixed it and they came on labor inspection. I remember going on mission in Argentina. I met one family, 3 brothers were trafficked, and in one of them with the entire family. And they were trafficked to a poultry farm where they've worked. They came from Bolivia to Argentina, and they were held in the worst form of slavery. And they were working, their labor inspectors come and go, and without even interacting, and they missed this issue. And this brings me to the key issue of prompt identification of trafficked persons. That identification is very, very vital, because unless they're identified, they will remain underground in the system, and some of them may die in the process. And I recall when he narrated his experience of how several others who will have found him, including those who they were supplying eggs in the supply chain, didn't really care. So that also brings us to the issue, bring to the forefront, I mean, for the forum, who are the first responders. So, yeah, so I know you've defined it well, but we must always include, because it's very dynamic and it keeps increasing. We must not let people like in the hotel and tourism industry, airlines, you know, they are also part of it. They could detect, even of course, we know immigration officer can miss it, and then sometimes you find people in the airport, and then they are part of it. So leaving that, because now we've established that first responders, not just government, because yes, government have the primary responsibility, and one can even call them the first responders. And in the government sector will include law enforcement officers, and then also include the administrators of justice, primarily. And then when you talk of caregivers, it can be both ways, because some MDAs, ministry agencies and all of that, provide also social services like shelter. Then also civil society and faith-based organizations are also part of that. So, so it's very important that we understand that. So state responsibility, like I said, is very well articulated in the protocol, and also many other international and regional standards that we have to that I wouldn't bore you with. But in terms of even emerging trends, you know, and because I just have a quick outline, if you're looking at the screen, you will see some of the issues I raised. And then of course, as time permits, because I've been forgot to ask, how many minutes do I have? 10 minutes or 15? So that I'll know to what extent I deal with some of the issues. How long do I have, please?
20 minutes.
Oh, okay, thank you. I think that's fair enough. So I'll be able to cover a lot of ground. So for me, the issues to consider includes around the emerging trend and strategies to prevent and combat trafficking within the sub-region that we've seen. We've seen, I think, and Tunde is here, you know, to correct me if I'm wrong. I think every member of ECOWAS country, within ECOWAS, I'm not sure of ECAS, they've all ratified, and I believe even good number, they've all ratified the protocol. And with that ratification of the protocol, I think to date we have 187 state parties to that protocol. That's huge, almost getting to universal adoption of the protocol. So first, but then there is something with the protocol that we always have to bear in mind. The protocol, the trafficking protocol is not self-executing. It means that they require state to, there's an obligation for them to have national legislation that is domestic, national, actually not just domestication, they have to enact legislation at national level that will criminalize trafficking, that will provide assistance, that will mainstream the issues that we want to be at the core of any anti-trafficking measures. That includes human rights-based approach, that includes a victim-centered approach, child and gender-sensitive anti-trafficking measures. They all count and they are all in it. So first step, they adopt this. Do they have the laws? In West African countries and within ECOWAS, is almost they all have laws at this at national level. But then the problem again comes with what are those laws covering? I've been to missions, for example, when I went to Gabon, and I don't know whether they have even corrected, whether they now have a new law. When I went to Gabon, their law on trafficking just protect children. And then I said, what happens beyond 18? After 18, I met actually children in that situation. Once they turn 18, then no protection and assistance. They become adult, and then no protection. So we know Article 3 definition of trafficking and how that will help the state take on the whole lot of and criminalize all that is listed under that article, and then take measures to provide comprehensive protection and assistance, not just to singular children, women, and of course, and I did mention in a number of my reports about men and how also some of the men don't want to talk about their victimization. Next slide. So next slide, thank you. Okay, so I will talk a little bit about victim-centered approach later, right to effective remedies. These are still part of my outline. And then, to talk about this in the context, you can move to the next slide. One of the things I think that states are most unwilling to promptly identify, protect, and assist victims of trafficking. Because if you're talking about what do the state need to know and do, it's around identification, protection, and assistance. So vital assistance, for example, like legal stay, is the most contentious. Identification means that they will be diverted from the criminal justice system as suspects and given some special status, including non-punishment approach, even if they are in breach of immigration laws. Within the West African region, we have the borderless border, we have the free movement of people. With it presents even some challenges, but again, it's supposed to be something but we've seen a lot of trafficking going on because of this. So it's easier for people, you see a lot of Nigerians trafficked to Mali, for example. There were times they rescued over 200, and then you go to Cote d'Ivoire, you see, and Togo to Nigeria. Nigeria is both a source country, a transit and destination, and you see also people coming. And then you see all those going even on boats, to other countries, almost like in the same slavery time. And all of this going on, and people are not even aware. The frontline officers have no capacity to identify. The protocol, having a standard operation procedure, protocol for identification, not clear, not well. I've been to missions in countries where they have not even identified through the frontline officers one single trafficking cases. And then you go to the other service providers, you see a lot of them having a lot of victims of trafficking with them. And you've seen to some other countries, they are just interested in identifying children. They may not want to identify any other people. So some countries, especially favored destination, they still criminalize and punish traffic persons like irregular migrants, and they don't care. So adoption, for me, adoption of a human rights-based approach, and then also victim-centered approach should be at the core of any anti-trafficking measures. And it has to be gender and child sensitive to be able to deal with different concerns of people. Today we have 187 parties as members of this protocol, but how many of them that have laws that are even in compliance with Article 3, or even had tried to incorporate the statement purpose of Article 2 that you must protect and assist victims with full respect to their human rights. The labor laws, police distinction, promote issues of promoting safe, legal, and orderly migration, because trafficking is migration gone wrong. And we're talking of also, the root causes, but I'm glad that SDG came out, clearly at the beginning of introduction. Yes, SDG, has to be part of it. But then the primary, before the pandemic now is presenting a different kind of problem. Before the pandemic, and especially within this region, the desperation to travel, which is tied to so many uncertainties, issues around inequalities, economic growing, youth unemployment, the desperation was already there. And yet, in anti-trafficking measures, we are still unable to deal government with the root causes of that. Even some international organizations, they will simply tell you, no, we cannot deal with even basic livelihood support for traffic victims. Then, how holistic and how sustainable those interventions without primarily looking at this? But where I see the greatest problem is the issue of capacity. If there is no capacity, first to appreciate what the law says, secondly, to put in to divert, and having a national referral mechanism that will make all that possible, then there is a problem. And this is primarily, there was a lot of focus on prosecution. Yes, prosecution is very important, and the prosecution, punishment, but without a victim-centered approach, then internal trafficking detected. There have been surge in sexual and gender-based violence. That I tell you because one of the things I did this period as a pro bono lawyer and a volunteer was to run a hotline for WACO. And then within April and June, I dealt with 227 cases of sexual and gender-based violence. And then, of course, even this month, I already have over 60. So, and then I was going to court intermittently dealing with this. So when I'm just looking at this and what will happen when the borders are gradually opening, you have a situation where people are trafficked and re-trafficked, they go the same way they come, they are repatriated, and then without thinking of safe repatriation, especially for favored countries, they are brought back and they go. The desperation will definitely increase because some people have even lost their jobs. There is no further hope. The money in Nigeria, the petrol dollar money is not flowing. Petrol fell, the prices, already the dollar is so up, inflation is eating deep, the exchange rate is down, and this is a reflection in so many other countries within the region. So this will become problematic. Next slide, please. And how many minutes do I have? So what, before what government, I want to just spend a little time on issue of effective remedies and how even that should be a concern of even first responders. Because oftentimes, when we look at victims of trafficking, we use them more as an instrument in the criminal justice system. And we talk about conditional assistance. And okay, we will assist you if you tell us who are the traffickers, and we can rescue you if you're not cooperating with the state, we will not provide this assistance. And sometimes it looks like human rights-based approach is not reconcilable with criminal justice approach. But I beg to differ, I take a different approach. It is consistent and it's not contradictory to the human rights-based approach to criminal justice system. And if we pay attention to that, it will actually make, especially engendering the victim-centered approach and engender justice that will deal with restorative justice. All of that is encapsulated in the right to effective remedies. So the problem is that adequate and effective remedies are often not within reach of they're out of reach of trafficked persons, because some of them are immediately arrested, seen as irregular migrants, detained and deported, even without having a chance of being identified as trafficked person, not to talk of being provided assistance they need, including compensation in Article 6.6 that was stated in the protocol. So what I find in reality is that whereas the right to effective remedy is well established within the normative frameworks, there is a gap in practice between law and its implementation when it comes to trafficked persons. Many states, and that includes the West African states, are not ready to provide any remedies, because they, in fact, even these days, they see themselves as victims. Okay, majority of the people who are trafficked are from our countries, and they don't feel any sense of responsibility with regard to dealing with the issues. They may just want to prosecute, and after prosecution, nothing else happens. And then those who are repatriating and IOM receiving, sometime the issue of due diligence, safe reparation is not what is their concern. So they just dump them, and then once they are down, they can't even ask for compensation. If they have worked in a particular state for years without payment, how do they go back? How do they get legal assistance they need? How do they even get support of the system? How do they get their legal state? And here again, the first responders are failing. You know, the papers and the legal papers, including even the source country of the source for trafficked person. I recall in Nigeria now, and many West African countries, I'm sure, they are using biometrics. And what this biometrics means is that if, for example, you have, given a false information, forged your name, or somebody obtained the passport and you have put your fingerprint, there is no way in the country of destination you can approaching the embassy of that country that they can assist you, and then you can get your document. I found many Nigerians in that situation in Europe. In particular, when I did a mission in 2013 in Italy, I met hundreds of them. In fact, states had already recognized them in Italy. They've diverted them, they've identified them as trafficked persons, and they want to legalize their state. And the problem now was Nigerian mission. And Nigerian government is telling them, you know what? You have to come back to Nigeria in order to change that your passport. So you tell me, what is the effective remedy here? What is restitution here? What if they come back? They've come back, and they can't even come back without any document. And assuming they give them document, if they come back, the country of destination cannot have them back. It doesn't make sense. Once they step out of the country, they've lost everything. And so they are in a quagmire, and they are in a situation where nobody. I met a number of organizations, especially Catholic faith-based organizations, and they were presenting to me, even in Germany. We're having this problem. How do we solve this problem? Because the Nigerian embassies are not helpful. And I've been also to other embassies in other countries. I've gone to mission in ECOWAS country, and it's the same complaint. So how do we, but within ECOWAS is not a problem because they can travel even within that place. So at worst, many trafficked persons are wrongly identified as irregular migrants, detained and deported before even they have any opportunity to consider seeking remedies. And this leads to what is called a double victimization. So, and this is where I want to stress that anti-trafficking measures do not affect adversely the human rights of and dignity of the person. We must always recognize the dignity of persons who are trafficked. And this informed my many. I spent a lot of time as a special rapporteur on the issue of right to effective remedies, came up with the draft principles and guidelines on effective remedies, and then also made sure that it was very comprehensive. So, and then, but how are we implementing this in practice? This is again where we have the gap. So in the end, I think it will take a collective, it will take public-private partnership, it will take civil society raising accountability stake. It will take capacity building, including use of new technologies to fight trafficking in persons in a sustainable manner. In the end, what will make a difference is placing a victim, the victim and the human rights at the core of any anti-trafficking measures. Next slide, please. So it will take, in a post-COVID world, I think it will take a community action, early warning mechanisms, having a national referral pathways, including responsive first responders that are committed and dedicated to the duties to change the narrative in the fight against this modern day slavery. And for me, the time is now for us to work together to reduce the vulnerabilities caused by ravaging coronavirus. Coronavirus have taught the world a lesson. That lesson is that we are mutually vulnerable. And when it comes to access to healthcare, even the access to medical facilities, I remember taking on some countries of favored destination that don't even provide free medical care to trafficked persons. We've all now seen how vulnerable the entire world is, that even the first world that goes to the moon and stars, that COVID and the virus, ordinary virus, some people will say, that have shown us that we are not yet there where we're supposed to be. So how do we deal with the human fallout from COVID? Because people may get so desperate that they will get to Morocco. I'm imagining when I did a mission to Morocco, you are in some part, you're seeing Europe. You go to Tangier, it's less than 14 kilometers. You go to there are other places. People may just troop there. They don't want to know whether they are dying in the sea or in the high sea, because I've met people who said, what else? I'm a living dead. I might as well die. It's only a tree. In Africa, we know, if anybody said that you will be killed, only a tree. Once you have livelihood challenges, human insecurity, people are gonna move. They will move and they will put in everything and put all of us at risk. And this is where I end it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Ezeilo. You've highlighted critical points. I think that the adoption of a human rights-based approach is absolutely critical in ensuring that we have effective interventions to combat trafficking. But you've also spoke about the push and pull factors that drive people to be vulnerable to human trafficking, the desperation that they have, but also in terms of responses, the issue for a national referral mechanism. And I know in many countries that have ratified the protocol and also domesticated it through different legislations, they have also put in place different standard operating procedures. They have national referral mechanism, but whether those mechanisms actually work and are effective is a big question. Mr. Olatunde, our professor has raised critical issues, maybe an indictment on ECOWAS. I give you some figures. According to the UNODC 2018 Global Report on Trafficking in Persons, it says that most of the detected victims are in sub-Saharan Africa. But it also says that most of the victims are actually children, and they constitute 55%, with 29% being adult female, 16% being adult male. So child trafficking is by far more commonly detected in West Africa than in the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. Girls in West Africa are most frequently detected as victims, but the numbers of girls and boys is more or less the same. However, UNODC also says that countries in West Africa tend to detect far more victims than other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. This means two things: either capacity to detect trafficking in persons offenses has increased, or there's just a huge increase in incidents of trafficking in persons. So UNODC 2018 report, but also the Africa Center for Strategic Studies 2019 say that internal trafficking in Africa is up 99%. We know ECOWAS is one of the biggest, one of the most prominent regional economic communities. And it's facing several challenges, including conflict in some countries in the region. And we also know that conflict creates opportune vulnerabilities for trafficking in persons, whether it's women and girls who are trafficked for sexual exploitation, or whether it's boys who are trafficked as child soldiers. So we're looking at issues in Mali, in Niger, in Nigeria. Of course, some of them are not ECOWAS member countries, but in the region. So all this really complicates an already problematic dynamic. So from your vantage point, and I know ECOWAS has an active program in combating trafficking in persons, please speak to us about some of the practical interventions that are, and conversations that are happening at ECOWAS. Mr. Olatunde?
Okay, I did not realize I had not unmuted my phone, my microphone. So thank you very much for giving me the floor. Thanks, Prof, Honorable Minister, other panelists, of course, Dora, our host, for giving me the floor. I'm going to first address, I guess, some of the questions before I go to my presentation. some of the issues that Dora has highlighted. I think it's a bit difficult to say. First of all, the report by UNODC on trafficking in Sub-Saharan Africa and West Africa, I would say is more or less accurate in terms of against the rest of the world, how much trafficking in persons we're seeing. Clearly, we have more children being trafficked than adults, and most of the trafficking is internal to the member states or across member states' borders, or from the ECOWAS region, for example, into the Central African region, that's ECAS. And then, of course, from Western Africa to North Africa as well. These are some of the trends and patterns. And it suffices to say that the points Prof has made about the push factors, economic insecurity, conflicts, problems in relation to inequality, issues of gender and how they are managed by various societies. For example, Niger still has, I think, the highest rate of child marriage in the world at the moment. These are all important. Conflict, particularly, and instability, as they affect issues of economics. Also, as Prof has highlighted, has an impact on movement. Now, the data you quoted from the Center for Strategic Studies, 99%, I'm not very sure about how they came to that conclusion. And I'm not very, well, I don't have statistics at hand right now, even though I do have some stats. But I don't think that the reality on the ground would justify saying there's a 99% increase. In any case, as you said, Dora, very importantly, that we need to ask ourselves, is there an increase, a massive increase in human trafficking in the region, or is there better recognition and better reporting? And I'll address that in my presentation, as well as in, I'm sure, questions that will come up afterwards. So I think we should just go straight to the presentation, which is already on the board. Efforts by ECOWAS to harmonize and respond to issues of trafficking in persons. And I'll keep first response in mind. I'm going to move fast in the first couple of slides so that I can focus on the meat of this presentation and of the theme. So let's go back to the first. I just want to give a quick overhead. The trafficking in persons is handled under what we term human security and civil society as a division. And I think what's really important is to stress that the trafficking in persons mandate is a mandate that intersects with other mandates of the division. Specifically, the division is responsible for issues of international humanitarian law, emergency protection, including IDPs, refugee issues. The division is also responsible for child rights, child protection. So each and every sexual and gender-based violence, which I'll talk about together, you see that working in one area reinforces results in another area. So that's just the point I think that I should make about since basically from 2005, even though the heads of states basically adopted a political declaration and plan of action. The first was in 2001. Please, next slide. The next slide, please. Okay, now this is just the approach we take as ECOWAS. So that, and I think this will answer some of the questions that have been asked and some questions that are likely still in the minds of persons who are a part of this webinar. So we work at certain standards and norms. We work on advocacy and capacity building. We do this with a range of partners and the UN, other organizations. IDLO, for instance, sent additional members of the Liberian team 2 years ago, was it, to a training workshop for law enforcement we hosted in Togo. And last year, I was part of also facilitating a trip by IDLO, by Liberian officers to Nigeria for a study tour. So we do a lot of that between, for instance, Gambia, Senegal, Nigeria, Mali, Benin, etc. And then, of course, a critical part of our work is also coordination, monitoring, and evaluation, which I'll come back to. Slide, please. I'm not going to say too much about this, but there have been ECOWAS plans of action from 2001 till the current plan of action, which is a 2018 to a 2022 plan of action. There's a joint multilateral cooperation agreement on combating trafficking between 26 countries, and that includes the 15 countries of West Africa and 11 countries of Central Africa. There are many more, or there are many other instruments on child protection, plan of action of ECOWAS on international humanitarian law. We are currently working based on the President's instruction on putting together a plan of action and implementing that plan of action on sexual and gender-based violence, but I'll come to that toward the end of the presentation so that I don't take up too much time. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, tools. I just want to mention a couple of these tools. Some of these are direct ECOWAS tools, and a couple of these tools are tools by our partner organizations. And this will address some of the concerns Prof has raised. For example, where we talk about, say, victim identification, ECOWAS has a policy, and I think that's in an earlier slide. ECOWAS has a policy on care and support, on care and assistance to victims of trafficking. A number of member states are using that protocol, have adapted it into their national, not just legislation, but into standard operating procedures at national level, etc. There are also guidelines on protection, support, and assistance to witnesses in trafficking in persons cases. These have also been, to varying degrees, domesticated or adapted to national conditions, in some cases successfully, but in one or two cases, there's a bit of good news on many of these. And our job, as I've already illustrated to you, is driving these standards in the member states. There's a model law enforcement curriculum, which I'm glad to say is very much in line with what Liberia did, since Liberia already has that. Then there are other tools by the UNODC, the I will say a bit more about operations just toward the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. Okay. Strategic goals of the Trafficking in Persons program. I'm just going to mention this very quickly. They include promoting development and institutional policy, promoting the development of institutional, policy, and legal frameworks, developing strategies and approaches for measuring and ensuring sustainable progress. And the issue of sustainable progress is key. One of the things we do, which I will again talk about later, but I just want to quickly mention it, is that we have annual synthesis reports of all 15 countries of West Africa. So when Prof was saying, for example, about ratifications, domestication, and she said that I should provide a more specific answer to that rightly, I immediately checked the database and found that, for example, Prof, you're completely right. All member states have ratified the Palermo protocol. And then as at 2 years ago, because we are currently developing the report for last year, but as at 2 years ago, when I think was the last time we had the full report in, we had, I think, 3 countries at the time, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, that only had laws on child trafficking and not the full human trafficking span of issues. Now I suspected that Benin or Cote d'Ivoire, but one of those countries has amended its law. So one of the things we do is keep track of development in member states on this particular issue. Then we also work on establishing operational linkages between member states. I will say a bit more about this within the Mano River Union, between 5 countries around Gambia, Senegal, Mali, Guinea. Last 3 years, between, as I've said, Nigeria and Benin, Nigeria and Mali, Nigeria and Niger, we actually sponsored interactions between the Nigerian NAPTIP office and the Nigerian ANLTP agency last year. So there was a series of exchange visits and a lot of discussions around operational modalities on dealing with cross-border trafficking between the two countries. And then driving advocacy and public sensitization on the eradication of trafficking in persons. Next slide, please. Now, priority activities and initiatives. And here I'm going to now talk a little bit more about what we've been doing, what we are doing, what we'll be doing in the future. This, and I think the next 2 or 3 slides, which will bring me to the end of the presentation. We have established and we continue to implement a network of member states focal institutions. It's a mechanism that brings the heads of trafficking in persons institutions, the National Task Force, focal institutions or focal points together annually. We held one in Abuja last year. We've been holding this now since 2007. And this is a forum that meets, first and foremost, let me just describe the procedure quickly. First of all, there is a standardized template based on the ECOWAS plan of action that is shared with all the 15 member states. By agreement, there is a deadline for reporting on measures being taken to implement their agreed priorities and plans of actions from the last year. And then we synthesize this into a complete, and that report we then analyze and we present that report at a meeting of these representatives of the member states to validate. So basically it becomes a platform for peer review and peer accountability. And that's also where member states get to exchange information and tell other member states what is going right or going wrong with regards to cross-border trafficking between countries. So we've seen that has led to, for example, so on and so forth. So this is call it the flagship activity of the program, of the Trafficking in Persons program. All other programs, all other pilot initiatives, everything else is built around this coordination system. Then we have support to member states in developing national action plans and establishing national task forces. We've done this across the 15 countries, all 15 countries, including, of course, Liberia. Liberia is now, I think, in its 2nd or 3rd national action plan. I was in Liberia on ground in 2006 to conduct training, initial training for the National Task Force and with the Ministry of Labor, so on and so forth. So we do a lot of those advisory services directly, and many times we do them through partners as well, since we don't have the personnel to be on field in every single country. Compliance assessments of legislation and other frameworks with the Palermo Protocol. This, as I've just told you, has led over the years to amendments and improvements and reviews of legislative regimes in member states to ensure compliance with the Palermo Protocol. Advisory services to member states with respect to ancillary legislation, criminal code, sex tourism offenses, legislation, immigration, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Other activities include implementation of capacity building projects, several. I'll mention some perhaps later with time. Please go back just to that slide. I just want to quickly mention 1 or 2 other things, please, quickly. Support for operational initiatives of police forces within West Africa in combating trafficking and on violations of the rights of the child. I've talked about training for law enforcement. We've done that severally. With another division in ECOWAS in a different department, that's the Directorate of Peacekeeping and Regional Security, we have been working and are currently working on further enhancing law enforcement capacities to deal with trafficking in persons and other types of trafficking as well. We have developed a broad manpower resource base for the region on trafficking and child protection, and then conduct of strategic communication events, including sensitization, documentaries, etc. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Now, let me talk about recent initiatives, and whatever time I have left, I will spend talking about this. Now, we initiated a program with the EU back in 2015, and these are more recent things. I don't want to talk about what we did in 2010 and in 2009 and 07, so on and so forth. For example, just to quickly mention, in 06, we had the joint plan of action between the 15 countries of ECOWAS and 11 countries of ECAS, as well as the multilateral cooperation agreement, which facilitates collaboration on trafficking, legally speaking, across those 26 countries. But more recently, let me start from 2015. In 2015, ECOWAS and the European Union signed an agreement to implement a program titled the Free Movement and Migration in West Africa Project. Under this particular project, trafficking in persons was a major component, and we did not only support all the initiatives I've already spoken about, but in addition, we had what we called the, what was it again? I keep mixing it up and say direct demand for funding. But it's actually a demand, it's a facility for, it's called DDF, but it's a facility for funding requests of member states based on what they've recognized as capacity gaps in their member states themselves. And that was a facility for all the 15 member states. I remember Liberia submitted a request. We were not able to fund that particular request because at the time we were out of funds, but we funded requests covering Gambia, Senegal, Guinea, Mali, Niger, Nigeria. There are about 7 to 8 countries that received grants under that program. And those grants included capacity building in different ways. So for example, there was the inclusion of the combat of trafficking in persons into curricula in some countries. There was supporting sheltering and protection in some other countries. In, for example, Mali, there were advocacy plans developed on labor trafficking for labor, forced labor to the Gulf countries, in some of the countries I've mentioned, like Senegal, and cooperation across borders in those countries. That was under the DDF. Now, apart from the DDF, I keep mixing it up. I know there's demand and there's facility. There's direct as well. I'll get it right. Then we also had the NSA, which was the Non-State Actors Fund, which supported NGOs in the 15 countries also in fighting trafficking, mainly from the point of view of protecting victims and providing palliatives to help victims, so on and so forth. Currently, as I speak, we've just started implementing the Organized Crime in West Africa Trafficking Response, or QUAT, which again is a partnership between the European Union for Component 3, which we lead, between the European Union, the German federal government that's represented by GIZ, with ICMPD working with the Human Security and Civil Society Division and the Trafficking Persons Program. And this is focused on strengthening existing national referral mechanisms in all the 15 countries, working also on strengthening the regional response mechanism. And we do have a regional response mechanism, which has been built around the network and the mechanism of focal points and institutions in the 15 member states. And then building what we call a regional crimes against the persons policy. Now, this particular aspect, the RCAP as we've called it, is going to be extremely important. And why it's extremely important is that trafficking in persons happens, as we know, due to a number of push and pull factors, interaction of push and pull factors. But in addition, we also need to recognize that some of the push factors include types of criminal victimization and other vulnerabilities, especially in the environment of affected women and children. So for instance, the link of things like domestic violence and sexual and gender-based violence, as Professor rightly said, to trafficking in persons. It's often the case that the person who finally becomes a victim of trafficking in persons has already suffered some other type of criminal victimization on occasion or occasioned by gender or age before the person finally is trafficked either internally or externally. So we have realized that to deal with it effectively while still prioritizing and having a dedicated strategy for human trafficking, we need to also strengthen the protection system for women, for children, and other, in quote, vulnerable categories with regards to certain types of offenses and certain types of criminal victimization, sexual and gender-based offenses, child abuse, violence against children, so on and so forth. Now, this is a current program we're implementing. I was saying that we are working on sexual and gender-based violence. I'll be having a meeting immediately after this one to work on, as I said, the plan of action, which we've been mandated to build by the ECOWAS president. And the ECOWAS president has very recently, I think about 2 weeks ago, issued a statement on gender-based violence in the ECOWAS region. Of course, calling everyone's attention to it and condemning in no uncertain terms the kind of egregious violation of rights that we've been seeing within the context of COVID. Next slide. As I end, I will just make 1 or 2 quick comments about COVID and its impact on trafficking in persons, gender-based violence, etc. And this is what comes to mind. For many actors in this field, we need a change in mindset. First of all, to piggyback on what Prof said about the entire world needing to, and I'm just going to use those words to express what she said. I think the entire world, the entire human race has to rethink its morality. How, for example, between the rich and the poor within our societies, between rich and poor parts of the world, the global south, the global north, and what our priorities will be and how we choose to live. That's as a general point. I do think that the world needs to rethink its morality, broadly speaking. Now, more particularly for frontline actors dealing with trafficking in persons, allied types of offenses and victimization within the context of the COVID pandemic. We need to, I think, adopt, and we've been discussing that in-house here, we need to begin to adopt a humanitarian actor's mindset, or almost what you call a military mindset. And what I mean by that is this. In most international organizations, when you join a humanitarian organization, there is a definite recognition that you're going into, maybe, for example, a hazard duty station. That mindset has got to be developed at every level, at the level of the region, at the level of member states, at the level of frontline personnel. Along with the development of that mindset has to be the development of policies and protective measures. For example, prioritizing PPEs for frontline personnel. I was just having a conversation yesterday with my immediate boss, and we were saying that we expect that if police officers are called to answer to maybe a case of domestic violence or trafficking in persons, will they say that because they are afraid of contracting COVID-19, they won't respond? So while they must adopt, and as all of us must adopt that mindset of, look, we're ready to practically take our lives in our hands and do the needful, there's also a need for all organizations, for member states as well, to prioritize protecting frontline personnel. And this will include PPEs, will include specialized insurance packages, and other types of, for example, testing, where test kits are available for frontline personnel. We must prioritize the role of frontline personnel. Otherwise, people who are vulnerable to abuse in trafficking in persons or from other types of abuse become doubly, if not triply, vulnerable and exposed within the context of COVID-19 or any other pandemic for that matter. I will end here. I know there will be questions to answer, but thank you for giving me the floor, and I'll hand the floor back at this time to Dora. Thank you.
Well, Atunda, thank you very much. And of course, it's very exciting to see the different initiatives that ECOWAS is putting in place to harmonize different policy instruments to support an institutionalization of interventions around trafficking, enhance capacity of different stakeholders. This is all very exciting. And I think, you're a friend of IDLO, so we will definitely be interested in a deeper conversation in terms of what is the actual impact that ECOWAS countries are seeing as a result of these interventions. In addition to the reports that come out by UNODC, the Global Report on Trafficking in Persons, we also have the Slavery Index that is produced on an annual basis, sometimes by the Walk Free Foundation. But we also have the U.S. State Department Annual Trafficking in Persons report that for the last 20 years has been coming out annually. Agnes, me and you have done work on trafficking in Uganda. And of course, when the report came out at the end of June, I was interested in two countries, here in Liberia where I am, but also in Uganda to see how we're doing. We're not doing very well for the last year. So speak to us, but also I know in the last couple of weeks, one thing that we saw, and I think that caused a bit of anxiety, was as a result of the conflict in the eastern part of DRC, Uganda, even during the lockdown, had to open up its borders to let people in that were fleeing armed militia and the conflict. And we know that conflict and such situations, I mean, just the migration flows, they exacerbate people's vulnerability around trafficking in persons. So speak to us a little bit, if we can manage the time, in terms of what interventions we're seeing in Africa and in East Africa. And I know you're going to talk about Uganda, East Africa, but also a snapshot about IGAD as a regional REC. So talk to us about what we are seeing in East Africa, what good practices, but also where we need to improve, because for the next report, especially Uganda, we need to do better. Agnes, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Dora, and thank you for highlighting that. I'll talk about what you've mentioned, but also go through my slides. As you may be aware, we've been having a transition, especially on leadership in Uganda, on the trafficking office. So we had the outgoing coordinator and another one coming in. So by the time they were even drafting the report, we are into that transition. So if you even read through it, they'll say, okay, there was no information about certain things. So we are yet to sit down to analyze, but you know the report's coming because of the information provided. So like I've always said, for me, what drives me and what drives our others is not really many times, it's like, you know, what interventions do we have, you know, for that? And there, of course, there's lessons always learned, you know, through various kinds of reports, whether they are good reports or bad reports. There's always a learning point to that. And you've also talked about Uganda, Uganda, of course, is the #1 destination, you know, for refugees in Africa, and #3 in the world. So 1.4 million plus. We've had a history, and I wrote an op-ed not too long ago, really sharing even Uganda's best practice, because we have one of the best practices for responding to refugees. We give them land, there's freedom of movement. I wrote a whole op-ed about that, but let's just go through, you know, my slides such that, you know, I do not, because I have just a short time. So within, it was nice to listen ECOWAS's example. I know ECOWAS is really ahead of everybody else in terms of integration. I know that, for example, in IGAD and EAC, there was an attempt through the Assembly of East Africa to actually get a law, you know, that harmonizes everything within East African region. And right now, of course, the presidents have to assent to it and all that. So hopefully, and now that we are getting into even IGAD, and we have a lot to learn about ECOWAS on how they've integrated, you know, their responses across the region. In terms of, I know that I'm supposed to weigh into East Africa, but since you know that, I think all our laws, the Palermo Protocol, which is the UN law, gives us the definition. But one very interesting thing is that much as they talk about exploitation, they say at a minimum, they give you at a minimum. So Uganda went overboard and said, okay, what else is peculiar to Uganda? I know that, you know, this slide shows all, like, I'll tell you some of the things that we included. For example, Uganda, we also have, when people talk about trafficking, usually it is, they rush to talk about sexual exploitation, labor, okay? But there's also forced marriage. In this day and age, we still have those traditions, and I think they may cut across Africa. For example, I know of a tribe where they first have to chase a woman or a girl and wrestle her down, and that's like courtship. Come on, you can't convince a girl with words, but you have to chase her up and down, and when you wrestle her down and like to show that you have muscle power, that becomes your wife. I mean, come on. So we have things like that. Much as we preserve culture and traditions, I mean, there are certain things that we really have to look out for, and forced marriage is manifested in things like that. We also have child marriage, which we include in our law. If you take a census, and all of us asked, especially us in Africa, and we asked our grandparents or parents, at what age did they get married? Some of them will shock you and say they got married before 18. And those traditions still happen. And really a child, cannot consent, to marriage. So we have also child marriage because it's prevalent in our law. We have the use of children in armed conflict. I know that personally, when I was younger, I had to flee the Lord's Resistance Army, the rebel group which wanted to take over government. They came to my home, and I was targeted with other young girls because they wanted virgins. And so, fleeing, that insurgency and being displaced as a child really made me appreciate the importance of enhancing community support. Because when we flee, I know that it was a Catholic mission which took us. Travel advisories, where all these international organizations, all the experts on Africa, by the way, took off, just like we saw them taking off during COVID. So we really, really have to enhance our own experts, our communities, and not just rely on the experts on Africa, who will take off anyway when challenges come. So community, those community leaders and those institutions are really, critical. We also have issues to do with the human sacrifice. And I've watched videos, I don't know how true these are, because witchcraft, when they of a penis of a young boy, and the witch doctors told him he was constructing a building, that if he buried witchcraft cuts across, for your enemies, if you want fortunes and things like that. So we looked at that and also include that in our law, besides the debt bondage and removal of organs, for transplant. And also, of course, when you talk about those push factors, bondage, mainly the desire, of going abroad. One of the number one thing I kept seeing when I talked to survivors and all that, the excitement of just boarding an aeroplane, to go overseas. That was that is an incentive, to people. So what do we show? What do our people know about what is it, there abroad? So we include that also in our law. So next slide, please. I just included everything in there because that is a common thing that cuts across, not just in Uganda or East Africa, but I know even in parts of Africa when you're talking about task forces, and we also have that. So we have the Ministry of Internal Affairs, where I'm the Deputy National Coordinator. That's the coordination body. So Section 21 of the Trafficking Persons Act gives the powers to create the office. So that office, it's the one which coordinates on activities. As you see on the board, on the slide, I think whoever is watching can also have those experiences to get to know who are the players. So you'll find that there are players in government, but also in NGOs and civil society. In Uganda, for example, our civil society organizations are also a collective. and they have their association, and they are represented on the task force. So it is easier. They help us a lot in victim support. Some of the shelters, I know that governments struggle a lot with providing shelters. We have the Director of Citizenship and Immigration Controls that will man our borders. Of course, issues to deal with prosecutions, you bring in police, you bring in Directorate of Public Prosecutions. And when you look at the chart, I'm sure that you look at what is there in your country, the players, because migration issues are not actually under one roof. I'm yet to see or hear of a country whereby issues of trafficking or issues of migration are all handled by one department. That's why it is critical to really work together. So what do we do together as a collective? Because each one has a mandate. So together as a task force, we also work on national action plans. And I know that we are launching ours on the 30th. Dora, I wish you were here because you are very instrumental in supporting us in that aspect. And we are also launching our national referral guidelines, on that very day. So there will be so much activity in doing that. And of course, members of the task force will be there, our development partners. We've had a lot of support from the International Organization for Migration, GIZ, International Labour Organization, and others. And so we do awareness campaigns, together, but also just to meet, when you constantly meet and speak to each other, it's easier as you navigate, through the process. And I know even our neighbors and people within the East African community also have similar instances. We also work across borders, as I'll see later in the next slide. So maybe we go to the next slide at this point. Because across borders, we are members of the East Common Market Protocol that was established in 2010, the free movement of persons, regime. And we are now working also towards the free movement of persons in the IGAD region. IGAD region has, 8 member states to that effect. So we think that, freeing movement, because contrary to what people think that most of the Africans actually go overseas, many Africans move more within our region. And the more we open up and match those skills, the only thing is, matching the skills, because definitely across countries, you'll have more doctors in one country than another. So that issue of really matching skills and what we need are some of the things we look into. And I know that also under IGAD, for example, we have migration labor experts. That's, I'm really, really excited about being part of that project, because I'm a very key believer of developing our own expertise, and we have them. When I listen to people across the African continent, speaking and how many years they have in experience, I really want, people to move, from either from ECOWAS to East Africa and whatever. But for us now, IGAD, what IGAD did is really to have migration labor experts within all those countries. So we are supporting because the expertise is really within we are understanding, our issues together, much as we learn and we link them to other areas. But really the gist of the thing is how do we support each other and understand our issues, within our region. We also have those regional migration coordination, committees. It helps in the coordination and sharing of experiences. Issues of migration, they cut across. Trafficking doesn't live in isolation. It also has linkages with other forms of transnational organized crimes. You've seen survivors of human trafficking used to carry drugs. And so what are those linkages? How do you follow the money? Because much as you do awareness, also money laundering and things like that, are we board? Because it is critical, because that's a lot of tons. And when you see traffickers having a lot of money, that means we really have to also fund and our initiative have to match. You know, when people have money, you know what that means. It cuts into corruption, it cuts into, you know, so many things in there. And we also have, you know, memorandums of understanding also help. I know that, for example, in Kenya, we have that because, you know, the routings change. I know at a certain point, you know, people were taking advantage of free movement regime and going through Jomo Kenyatta Airport. So it took that collaboration between Uganda and Kenya. Now we have those MOUs going on, and we are also the referral mechanisms, not to just remain, you know, nationally, but also across the board. As you know that, you know, you cannot deal with trafficking alone, you know, as one country. Then national coordination mechanisms are critical because you have to coordinate. You cannot, like I said, Uganda, we don't deal with migration issues or issues of trafficking just under one roof. So you really have to coordinate and collaborate in there. And the Office of the Prime Minister is our coordination body in there, where all issues of migration, you know, should be coordinated. Next. Yes, we cannot talk about this without talking about, of course, COVID-19 and the impact. I know that the former speakers, Professor also talked about it, but I wanted people to know that when countries, you know, when you talk about lockdowns, when you closed borders, that it didn't mean that all the borders are closed. Because in Africa, you know, we have porous borders. I know that I was in the situation room where we are managing 54 of Uganda's borders, but it was also important for us to map out what are the porous borders. And in our mapping exercise, 336. And I know all our countries have those porous issues, such that when you close the border, other people will pass somewhere anyway. So I know that those who are tempted to cross using ungazetted border points, because when you close even a porous border, they create another one. So people were taken straight to quarantine, because when you go trying to cross in, it was taking you to quarantine. But the thing is, now we are seeing that health took over that aspect. So people who were got, they didn't take time to first talk, are you survive of trafficking? And so health, you know, took precedence. You know, they are taking people to quarantine, you know, straight away. And I know that across the region, for example, when they cross borders, not countries didn't close borders at the same time. I know that when we stopped transportation across borders, our neighbors had not. So they would bring people to the border, and of course they would use the porous routings. We also saw that, you know, survivors were not included in COVID-19 responses. That really cut across. You've seen, for example, stories in the media where Africans were targeted in China, for example. It took a lot of our ministries of foreign affairs because they were accused of having COVID-19 and all that. So we saw they were not included, much as our countries distributed posho and everything else. People were targeting only their citizens. And we saw that victims of trafficking were abandoned en route, even before the closures. Some of them were abandoned, others were stuck with their traffickers up to date. And that happened across, you know, internal and external. I know also internally, I know that domestic workers, for example, were sent away from homes, and because those are the first people they lay off after all. And for us, like women, really constitute, you know, 80%, about 80% of low-skilled, you know, workers in the Middle East. But that is mainly to do with you know, domestic work. You've seen the challenges, you know, of them having no social security, you know, discrimination and xenophobia. And for me, domestic work is the most hurting, really, because domestic work is usually, they demean that kind of work. It's the way they treat women. It's the way they treat housework, what they call housework. I even hate to use the word low skilled. What is low skilled about housework? Hey, if you've never done housework, then you'll call it low skilled. That is a lot of work. And we should start paying our women well. I keep asking people that if men did domestic work, you'd have seen how many protocols they are in right now. You would have seen that the wage would have been really high. I'm being honest. because I've also spoken, to male counterparts. If domestic work was done by men, I can assure you the pay would have been more. I can assure you there would be the regulations, but as long as it is called low skilled, as long as it is done, it is done in the shadows and it's not out, as long as they are not included in social security, as long as it is not seen as work, then we'll keep talking and talking about domestic work. Because first of all, right now, they're the most exploited if you're talking about externalization of labor across the board. So I think just to summarize, because I think I'm just remaining with a few minutes, it's really, you can go to the next slide as I summarize, that policymakers should ensure really, fair recruitment, gender, and rights-based policy responses, adhering to those international standards. Ratifying those conventions is important. We should sign those bilateral agreements. And I want to see more that we do it even at the REX or African Union and all, because when you negotiate as a bloc, you have more power. But if you're just single countries, you know what that means, the power dynamics. You don't really get a lot out of this. Continuously providing that information to our migrants. Data, that is one thing. We have to really, really have informed decision making, and data is huge. Ensuring that, of course, migrants are included in COVID-19 responses, and enhancing our borders, harnessing the use of technology. Right now, after we mapped out that, I know that for Uganda, we are moving forward to really connect our borders, using technology and enhancing that, so that you can sit at the capital and have an eye on what is going on, because it is about facilitating people's movements and really deterring those who want to harm us, and those include human traffickers. So thank you for listening, and thank you for all your efforts. I know it's not just about governments, but even everybody who's listening in has a stake in this. I know for sure, because even if you just report a case, even if you care about a subject, then you listen in to a conversation like this. And I wish you all well as we deal with this, big challenge that we have, not just in Africa, but globally as a whole. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think one thread that is really emerging from this conversation is the need for a rights-based approach or rights-based policy interventions, but also the need for inclusion. I think the aspect of inclusion is really important if we are designing and implementing all these initiatives, to protect or to respond to victims of trafficking in persons. Are they sitting at the table? Are we listening to them in terms of what could work best for them? But also it's because victims of trafficking actually have the information, probably much more than the persons who are making the responses, because they know how they were trafficked, they know the modalities and the methods of operations of the traffickers. So being able to include and hear victim voices in the different policy considerations we are making is really important. Deputy Minister Phil Dixon, I think Liberia is in a very good place. Of course, as IDLO, we're excited to work with your ministry, but also with the Liberian government in enhancing efforts to respond to trafficking in persons. Could you share with us, hopefully in 15 minutes if we can, what are some of the opportunities? What are some of the opportunities?
Sorry to interrupt. I think I will be leaving. I hope I said that, try to send an email by 1:30. I should be. Yes.
Okay. Deputy Minister, opportunities and challenges for first responders in Liberia. In 15 minutes, if you can.
All right. Thank you very much. Let me greet the listeners on social media and all of those participants on this conference who I've met before, like the IDLO Africa head, and I had nice conversations when you were being introduced to start your tenure in Liberia. And my former schoolmate, Margaret, as well as those I'm meeting for the first time. I'm glad to also see Olatondi. I'm not sure I met him before, it's the first time, but I know we have worked together and shared emails. So it's great to be with all of you. I would like to start by talking a little about the structure of the National Task Force. Maybe I should also mention that I speak from the professional background as a lawyer. So the task force in Liberia has these governmental agencies, including the Ministry of Labor that chairs, the Ministry of Justice is the co-chair, and other line ministries and agencies such as Foreign Affairs, Internal Affairs, Gender, Health, agencies like the police, and we also have provision for engagement with partners who are non-statutory members of the task force. So that's where the likes of IDLO and other organizations come in. When it comes to first responders, there are several. So in Liberia, we have an anti-trafficking hotline, 2883-2883, and it's free for the 2 cell phone networks that are in Liberia. So those who man the hotlines can be termed as first responders. We have our Liberia Immigration Service personnel who are at border posts and other major locations in the country trying to see if non-Liberians are here legally or not. We have the Liberia National Police, which is at multiple places, just like the Immigration Service, but they are primarily concerned with violations of the penal code in general, particularly where it relates to Liberian nationals. We have the Drug Enforcement Agency, which is part of the responders, and it gives attention to the individuals involved in drugs offenses. So why it's possible that some of them might be Liberians or foreign nationals acting on their own steam, it is possible that a drug raid could uncover a trafficking ring. So because of that, we have them playing a role as responders. Interestingly, we have the inspectorate at the Ministry of Labor. So they are a grouping that we think could be more active as a first response mechanism. So far, they have not fully adopted that role, but they are a grouping that should play that. We are also looking at our foreign missions, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, serving as a first responder on issues of Liberians abroad. While we are trying to protect Liberians from trafficking in our country, we are also alert and aware that in the same way non-Liberians can be trafficked in Liberia, it's possible that Liberians are being trafficked in other countries. Consequently, we have developed, just before the advent of COVID-19, a manual for our foreign service personnel. So at the close of COVID, we intend to roll that out to get them involved as first responders in the fight against trafficking, but with emphasis on Liberians abroad. What constitutes our opportunities? With a lot of activities on trafficking in persons going on, awareness is increasing. So, like during the course of this week, Liberia is actually having 4 days of action against trafficking in persons. Today happens to be the first day, and events will be occurring in 2 of the 15 counties. Tomorrow we are going to another county for our national media event. Thursday we are having the formal program in Nima County that borders both Ivory Coast and Guinea, and we'll close on Friday for task force meeting and a launch of the Liberia annual report on trafficking in persons in Monrovia. That's the first time Liberia is doing a report. So all of these activities are increasing awareness across the country. We also have a high level of regional collaboration. Olatunde mentioned some of the endeavors of ECOWAS in which we partake. And during the course of this year, we're actually able victims to their country. Some of them were trafficked to Liberia, but the bulk of them, over 40, were being routed to other countries through Liberia. So our personnel or first responders intercepted them, returned them to their home country. There's another case of a Nigerian who was trafficked to Ivory Coast, and some Liberian nationals met her. They managed to conceal her and bring her to the Liberian border, where they turned them over to Liberian authorities. We got in touch with our colleagues from Nigeria through the embassy, and she has now been resettled in the Federal Republic of Nigeria, her home nation. Interestingly, we also have a level of increasing support budgetarily and from donors. So for the first time in over 5 years, a budget line on trafficking in persons was inserted . A number of activities. As I said, we just had a line for trafficking in persons included in our budget for the first activities against trafficking in persons. It was a small step, a baby step, but it actually made a lot of sense. We also need to mention that we have which enabled us on a lot of programs. That's how we are in persons. What are our challenges? One of them is getting the public to accept that a person in an urbanizing continent like Africa coming to the city or going to another country is not an automatic good. And the difficulty is you go to every village, they know of some of their sons and daughters that made it good in a big city or abroad. So those of us who are carrying messages on trafficking in persons, it places a barrier that we have to venture above if we want to get people to accept that, yes, taking your son and sending him to the city is no guarantee of a good life. Another thing I thought to clarify, I know there's this discussion abroad in the West that a lot of trafficking victims from Africa are children. However, proportionately, Africa is the youngest continent. over half of our population is below 18. So even if the trafficking victims are a realistic cross-section of Africa's population, is going to have more children than other parts of the world like Europe or Asia that are having aging populations because of low fertility. Some of the highest countries in terms of fertility in the world are in Africa. Olatunde talk of Niger is one of them. Liberia also figures within the top 20. And within that top 20, I'm sure there's at least 12 or 14 that are in Africa, with West Africa contributing about 6. One challenge we face is asymmetrical collaborations. So we have it easy for one quote unquote low-income country to tell another low-income country, give me information that we need to prosecute a case. But when it's a low-income country telling a high-income country from another continent, give us information, we think this person might be in danger, or we want to pursue a case elsewhere, we have to jump through hoops, pass through barriers, cross hedges, and go around hurdles to get those pieces of information. So asymmetrical collaboration is a challenge. Yes, I talked about increasing support, but it's actually from very, very small to very small. It's not like we have reached a stage of having sufficiency in our ability to respond. So we still have huge gaps. For instance, our budget line was $50,000. I think for some countries, that's just one vehicle for a government official. But that is what should run our Secretariat on Trafficking in Persons in an entire calendar year. Because we have a lot of budgetary challenges that result in a small fiscal space. There's another situation of custody issues. And we all know that trafficking in persons is part of a continuum. So 2 children might be living in the same house. If one is exploited while another is not, the exploited child could be a victim of trafficking, while a child who is not exploited is not a victim of trafficking. So we have a situation wherein the issue of custody, assuming you go out there, where do you place all of these children who you may have? Institutionalized care is not exactly the best option. Children should be in families. So our gender ministry has now begun a plan of identifying families that are willing to serve as foster parents. And it's an ongoing process. We still have not reached a satisfactory number. We also need to find a way to create more regulatory involvement in our kinship care system. So for instance, if a father dies and he has brothers and sisters, nobody is going to the court in our part of the world in order to get the children. They're just a family meeting. If there are, say, 4 children, maybe your sister takes 2 daughters, one brother takes a son, another brother takes another child. So that child had no alternative. They went to a home where there's a kinship arrangement, but we think there should be a role for the local government, say the community leaders, for the Ministry of Gender, to make follow-up and see that these children conditions of life are not falling beyond what is generally prevalent within the community. So as I enter my final minute, I must say that Our first responders are there. We are increasing the training. We are preparing them to appreciate all of those who have contributed to their training, various international organizations, foreign governments, IDLO, ECOWAS, US, our own ministries and agencies in the government of Liberia. They are all doing great. We hope to do greater, and we are of the opinion that conversations like this will give us ideas that can be applied to achieve same. Thank you.
Deputy Minister, thank you very much for your remarks. And of course, congratulations to you and to the government of Liberia for the elevation. I think that was very important. So I think continuing to harness our efforts on this is really important. Margaret Nigbar, and to everybody who's still with us, thank you very much. We know we're coming down to the last minutes of this conversation, so please stay with us. If you have questions or comments, you can use either the Q&A section or the chat box. Nigba, we're going to do a service to you, but could you share your insights on what civil society actors are doing in hopefully 15 minutes?
Okay, thank you very much. And I just want to say I'm humbled to be one of the panelists for this discussion today, talking with great women and wonderful people from the region. So I'm happy to be here, and I also want to say thank you to the participants who all make up the time to listen to this important information. So basically, I'm going to be talking about the civil society approach, looking at the practical aspect of our work, how we've been responding as first responders in Liberia. TRP in Liberia is a prevalent internal trafficking. It's one of the prevalent trafficking in Liberia, especially around our rural community. It takes place from the rural area to the urban area, with majority of our victims being children. Most of the families give people the impression in rural areas that we're going to improve your life, we're going to give you a better life, we're going to make everything, give you all the opportunities you need. And most of the time, our children are being used in the process, and parents are being misled, and their children are brought to the city and being abused. So there's still a major issue around people understanding trafficking in Liberia and how can we identify these issues. Most of the trafficking issue we find is around forced labor, begging, street vendor. We have most of our children in the street, when they bring them from the rural area, they bring them to Monrovia, they allow them to take the street to sell. They are not allowed to go to school. Sometimes they work from in the morning up to night. Sometimes they are beaten and they get lost. They are left at the police station and you have to reach out to them. So there are a lot of issues around internal trafficking in Liberia, especially for us who are first responders and working as civil society actors. Traffickers, most of the time, they are mostly family members. They are people who are close relatives. People trust them and they believe that they're going to promise relatives a better life and children are going to have a better future. And most of the time, most of the traffickers, most of the victims of trafficking are women and children who are being misled by people and brought in to the city and they are taking advantage of. Sometimes the issue of this trafficking also leads to rape. As an institution of Voice Liberia, we have received over 300 sexual gender-based violence cases since the COVID-19, and we respond to sexual gender-based violence issue where we render pro bono legal services out to women. But most of the time, the result of this rape case is also from trafficking. You find out that most of these children, girls are being trafficked from one community, from one county to another. And because of the result of the trafficking, they get raped, they get violated in the process. And the issue of prosecuting, pressing charges, most of the time the focus are on the rape issue, and people leave the factor of trafficking. There are other factors that also lead to LGBTQ. So it's important that we also focus and put more attention on those other factors in terms of prosecuting perpetrators of sexual and gender-based violence. The next slide. Okay. Some of the concrete action we have been taking as an institution, as civil society actors in Liberia, in responding to trafficking, especially around the COVID. We launched a toll-free hotline for the public to freely report issues relating to pressing trafficking, which is 1226 or 088722382. So this line has been very responsive because we have received a lot of calls, especially some of the reports are coming around LGBT, and we were able to identify the issue of trafficking to be able to respond to them. So we also been providing medical service and short-term accommodation for pressing in trafficking survivors. So sometimes most of the survivors, they've been abused. They come with psychological problem, trauma, they need medical assistance. To identify the issue, to identify the case is just one factor. But how can you reach out and how can you get in that mental stability? How can you get in some good health care to be able to have a better life after being released or saved from the perpetrator? So we provide medical services, we provide short-term accommodation because that has been an issue, especially around birth certificate issue in Liberia. It's a serious challenge. In terms of reunification, we find a challenge and an issue in reuniting families. So if it takes a longer time or longer period for you to reunite that family, you need to find a place to keep that survivor until you can reunite them. So there are some survivors we apply all of the effort, and we still don't find it. We don't find their families to be able to reunite them. So we arrange for foster care for victims to require long-term care. So we talk to families like within communities because we are working on different projects in different communities to be able to keep these survivors, and we support them from a long range. We provide psychosocial counseling for family reunification to vulnerable street children. So there are a lot of children roaming the street who are selling, and it's important that they be talked to. Some of them have lost faith in themselves and in life. So they need psychosocial counseling, they need to be counseled, they need to be talked to be able to move on, to have a better life. So we are responding to that during this COVID. We've been doing that even up to present, and then the COVID started, we just reinforce our action. So another action is that we do follow-up investigation, work closely with the Liberian National Police, especially the Women and Children Protection Station, which is SWAP, as civil society actors, to be able to respond in Liberia to issues of trafficking. We actively have about 30 monitors in different communities that work closely with the police, work with the borders, work with community leaders to be able to track and identify some of these issues, especially around trafficking. People, especially people in Liberia, are seeing trafficking to be a way of life, especially the internal trafficking, moving family, children from rural area to the urban area. A lot of people don't believe, they don't see it as trafficking, as far as giving them the opportunity to be able to move ahead. So it's important that we create more awareness to be able to talk to trafficking, to be able to identify and prosecute trafficking perpetrators. Next slide, in terms of our challenges that we have been faced with during this COVID and before COVID. One of the issues we have is underreporting of trafficking cases. A lot of people don't understand the issue of trafficking. Trafficking issue is very key. Liberia has done a lot from last year in a few years, but there's still more need to be done. low community awareness. If you move to the community, like a direct first responder that is working directly in the community, interacting with people, a lot of people don't understand the issue of trafficking. People cannot identify what is trafficking. Even if you see a trafficking victim, how can you identify, how can you arrest, how can you apprehend this issue? So there's still more need for awareness, because if we have more awareness and a lot of people is informed, we'll be able to report more cases. Most of our workers now is in the issue, we need to keep them safe. People now are having issue challenges around the COVID, that they don't want to move out in the community, they don't want to interact with people. So the lack of PPE, sometimes you provide PPE for monitors just for 2 weeks, and after the period they are all exhausted, they still need more PPE to be able to reach out to more people. So that has been an issue, lack of PPE. So because of that, people don't want to take risks to get out in the community. But yet and still, we are still trying to reach out to people. Because even if we have the online mechanism, how many persons in Liberia, in rural community, have access to internet, have access to Facebook, to the social media, to be able to reach the online platform? So one of the ways we've been trying to address some of these challenges is that we have one of the 2 radio stations that cover the country. We have ERBC, we have ECOWAS. So we have these JINCOs and radio program that is called, that we create awareness so that people can be able to reach out to us. And we look at social blaming, especially around rape and domestic violence. Most times, some of the victims of trafficking are being abused, they are being raped, but people tend to blame them. People hold them responsible, accountable. They should be held responsible rather for their action. So how can you counsel these people? How do you expect these people to come out to report issues? So because of that, we still have a lot of issues, especially around social blaming of victims, domestic violence. People had abused, they want their information to be kept private, but they don't want to come up. So because of that, there's a serious issue or challenge with witnesses or testimonies or people coming up to report their issue. Sometimes on the hotline, you get people with call, and then you try to trace, to follow. You cannot see who for you to link to be able to identify the trafficking victim. So there are a lot of issues there. Victim recovery services. A lot of people who have been abused, most times say, okay, yeah, there's a trafficking issue, this lady was trafficked. But what is the recovery process? What are we doing for those victims to encourage other people who have been trafficked, or people who see or hear about trafficking issue to be able to report this issue? That has been an issue. So that is one of the factor challenges that lead to the only reporting of trafficking cases in Liberia. Then we got partial skills in investigating trafficking issues. We have a lot of people are trained, but not many persons are trained to understand trafficking. Trafficking, like sometimes I say to people that SGBV is not a breaking news. When we talk about domestic violence, and you see media, people want to take the social media and say, yeah, this person was raped today. So it's a bit sensitive and technical. It's the same as trafficking. People still see taking people, children, bringing them to the city to sell, go to the market. In recent times, we had a serious situation at the Rallytown market where a little girl was abused, a survivor, and we're following up on a rape case. But in that process, we found out there was serious trafficking taking place there. There's this man who was from Bon County, who was just transporting the people's children from that area, bringing them to Monrovia to sell to different women, in the survivor rather was able to talk to us, and were able to identify other children who were abused, who were just used to come in the morning and just sell the whole entire day, and were able to rescue them. So, and when we got the perpetrator, the only thing he had to say was that, I don't understand what you're saying about trafficking. I'm only being good. I'm only trying to help these survivors. I'm only trying to live a better life for them. Their family don't have anything. They are very poor, and I brought it to the city so that tomorrow they can be somebody good. So that's the need for serious awareness in terms of investigating and following up on trafficking issues. Another one is that the lack of adequate resources and logistics in investigating and reporting trafficking issues. Like, for example, psychosocial support. a shelter home. There's an important need for a shelter home or safe home for trafficking survivors. Sometimes if you find some of the safe homes in Liberia, they take only females, but boys are also trafficked. So then that becomes a serious challenge when we come across issue of children, boys who are being trafficked. Where do you keep them? Where do you have those survivors to be able to give their own psychosocial support? Because counseling is not just one day you meet the survivor that they say, oh, you okay and talk. It's a continual process. You need to continue talking to them. You need to make sure that they have a better understanding, and sometimes that they are ready and prepared to say, okay, I think it's important that I pursue this case and go to court that these cases are prosecuted. Sometimes their family don't understand. They feel they are being the issue of them coming out to follow prosecution, work along with the police, work along with law enforcement officers. So go to court is that they are trying to stop somebody on a life. They are trying to undermine somebody. So they need to be talked to. They need to understand the issue. Why we need to serve as, why we need to prosecute this issue, why we need deterrence, why we need more cases. So if they are not talked to, you have a hostile witness. You don't even have the cooperation for them to cooperate. That has been one of the issues, that you don't even find witnesses, you don't even find survivors to be able to testify, because sometimes people get frustrated in the process and wait so long, and there's no care. So the issue of shelter home is important. We need to provide safe home for trafficking survivors. Lack of proper coordination, and that is what we have been since the COVID. We have had huge cases, especially around the LGBTQ and identifying the trafficking issue. So we have established a safe home where we can be able to keep survivors, because we have been using short-term accommodation, asking family in the community, people to host survivors. That has been a serious challenge and more costly for us, because if you find foster parent short-term accommodation, you spend more. But that would be if you have a shelter home, a place secure and safe where you can have children, you can have survivors of trafficking there, that you can pay more attention to take care of them. So we have some issue or challenges, because we have established the home is available, but we want trained personnel, people who understand issues of trafficking. That being one of our challenges. And how can we maintain some of these staff? Because you need caregivers, you need social counselors, you need all of our enforcement officers to be there to, to secure, to protect these people. So it's one of our challenges, especially around this safety. Lack of proper coordination amongst key actors in fighting against trafficking in person. For example, we have the police is working, we have the immigration, we have the government, we have this task force, the trafficking task force. But how can we coordinate? How can we work together? How can we include civil society to be more vibrant, to be able to respond, so that this issue of work and coordination is not about one person glory. It's about reaching out that if a voice is on an issue of trafficking, you can reach out to the police quick and then you get response. You can be able to contact somebody at the border point. So the issue of coordination has been a serious issue, especially around communities. There are community leaders and community actors, chiefs, empowerment chiefs. They don't understand trafficking issues. So how can you bring them on scope with law enforcement officers to be able to cooperate with law enforcement officers? We have police stations not around, but law enforcement officers still need to work with civil society actors. They still need to work with the community leaders to be able to effectively respond to these issues. Because sometimes trafficking victims, if the perpetrators get away, it's because the community also is not cooperating with the law enforcement officer. So that coordination is important. We're talking about awareness, limited awareness among the public, especially in interior regions. How many persons in the interior understand the issue of trafficking, like I said earlier? A lot of people don't know. So there's still need for more awareness. We need to go down to the community, talk to the common people, speak their language, create jingles, speak their dialect, make them to understand this is it, so that they will stop sending their children to Monrovia in the name of getting a better life. That can also help to reduce the issue of sexual gender-based violence. That can also help to reduce the inflow of children, street vendors selling on the street. So we need to create more awareness in our community. Next slide. So for recommendation, we are recommending that there should be more awareness through community-based initiative on trafficking in person to enable people know and identify where there is TRP case. Because if people are able to identify and know this is trafficking, we'll have a lot of people reporting on this issue. Another one is concrete action in prosecuting perpetrator of in trafficking in person. We have been trying, but we don't have a lot of cases in terms of prosecution. For example, I talk about rape. Most of the time I work with the LGBT rape cases, we go to court. But you will find that you have issues that involve trafficking, child labor, rape, and all of that. But people focusing on rape. So I think it's about time now. We also are trafficking in our charges when we try to prosecute these perpetrators to be able to prosecute victims, perpetrators of trafficking, alleged perpetrators, so that people cannot go scot-free, because people still see the issue of trafficking as a way of life. So that people will start to understand that for every action you will be accountable and you'll be responsible for your action. So we need adequate care, including shelter home for victims and other forms of support. Like I said, we need to provide shelter home, we need psychosocial support, we need medical recovery, because some of the children, some of the people, individuals who are trafficked, sometimes when you come in contact with them, they are very being abused. They need serious medical attention before you can even start to move forward to talk about prosecuting, to talk about launching an investigation. So they need serious medical attention. So it's important in the recovery process. And civil society actors need more training to be able to investigate and identify ITP cases. There are a lot of other institutions, civil society, local grassroots organizations who are coming in contact with trafficking issues, but they don't have the idea, they don't understand. So there's no way for them to be able to identify and to be able to report these issues. So there's still more need for training and awareness with civil society actors, especially around local actors in the community, to be able to identify and be able to investigate ITP. There should be proper documentation. Another issue is the issue of documentation. How custody, how can we document, how can we keep record of these issues so that we can be able to come out and say, yes, between this period to this period, yes, we came across issues. Sometimes people just report issues and say, yeah, this, but there's no proper documentation. So at the end of the day, when you come to look at our national statistics on trafficking, they tell you that, okay, we have 15, 20 cases. That is not, it's not normal because we are not documenting, but there are more cases of trafficking taking place because of the documentation. So we will ask international partners, like people that are IDLO and other partners as listening people here, getting involved to pay more attention in working with civil society actors and training them in investigating, identifying, and documenting issue of trafficking so that we can be able to supplement the effort of the government to be able to get the adequate results. Thank you.
Anthony, Margaret, thank you very much. I think you've raised very critical issues, things around creating awareness. I think creating awareness about trafficking remains an intervention that is very important, but also because, especially on the continent, we have traditional practices, generally accepted practices and behaviors that actually perpetuate trafficking. So we need to create a lot of awareness and sensitization about some of these things that are actually criminal in nature, but also hold perpetrators accountable. And I think it's, in terms of holding perpetrators accountable, it's one place that I think the movement and the body of actors that are doing work in this area is finding very difficult. Are invisible, and the COVID-19 pandemic has even enabled them go deeper. So thank you, Anthony, Margaret, for your comments. We are out of our time, and I thank everybody that continues to, that is still with us. So to the panelists, we've been talking to ourselves, but now we can speak to some of the questions that have come in from our participants. So what we are going to do, because of time and respectful to everyone who's still with us, I'm going to share questions with our panelists, And in responding to the questions, the panelists can also give their closing remarks in 2 minutes, at max 3 minutes. Agnes, I will start with you. So some of the questions that are coming in are, during COVID-19, what are some of the modes of trafficking that we see manifesting? Because also there's a UNODC a paper that came out, preliminary findings and messaging based on rapid stock taking, the impact of COVID-19 on trafficking. So it notes that because of the curfews, the lockdowns, etc., victims are more vulnerable. We have spoken to that, but also traffickers are operating more underground. So what do we see, if at all, some of the modes of trafficking that are manifesting during this period? But also somebody is raising a question about child marriages. In some places, or some people don't actually understand how child marriage is a form of trafficking, or whether it should be a form of trafficking. So could you speak to us about what governments need to do to really enhance interventions around child marriage and forced marriages, and why that is a form of trafficking? And then you can give us your closing remarks. Olatunde, you spoke a lot about the great initiatives that are happening at ECOWAS, and some of the questions that are coming in are, definitely there is a disconnect, and not just at a regional level, but also at a national level. I mean, we have laws, national action plans, referral mechanisms, we have strategies, we have standard operating procedures, we have task force terms of reference. We have so many things that are also happening at a national level. But there's always a disconnect between the legal and policy frameworks and mechanisms that we have and actual interventions around trafficking in persons. And we do have limited resources for responses. So some of our participants would like to know where our resources should be prioritized. And I know it's a very difficult question, but I hope you can respond to that, and then your closing remarks. Minister Phil Dixon, Margaret has spoken a little bit about this, but some of the participants would like to know whether we have shelters in Liberia for supporting victims of trafficking in persons. But also there's an interesting question that I saw. Let me just try and pull it out. Let's see, where is this? So there's a question about shelters, but there's also a question about, I can't see it. Yes, so Deputy Minister, you'll speak to us about the question, the issue about shelters in Liberia, and unfortunately I can't see the other question. And then your closing remarks. Once I see it, I'll come back to you because it's important. It's about a fee on child issues. Anthony Margaret Nigba. For civil society who see, and I think Agnes also spoke about it, what interventions can be done to better protect domestic workers in this period of COVID-19, more so because here in Liberia, we know that most people are actually trafficked for domestic work, but also in all kinds of work that are related to domestic work. And then your closing remarks. Agnes, we'll start with you. 2-3 minutes max, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the first question is what are the trafficking issues emerging online sexual exploitation, online recruitment, because when you're locked down with your phone. Everybody now with children are studying online, so traffickers are not also silent. So those lessons they are teaching your child online are the same methods in which traffickers will go, to try to recruit children. Even pornography. I remember at a certain point when we were removing, street children, children from the street, they got 10-year-olds with implants. They were being used for pornography so that they don't get pregnant or things like that. So let's have a look out for that, train our law enforcement, train everybody, take care of the children, where they are at, what they are seeing online, those phones, those WhatsApp, they are, the social media, they are using a lot of social media to recruit. So that is one. Two, somebody talked about, the child marriages. Yes, of course, a child cannot consent. In Uganda and in many places, a child is under 18 years. In fact, in our law and also in the UN law, when you're proving, trafficking, you don't have to prove the means in which the child was recruited. You only have to prove that a child has been recruited for exploitation. And so all the issues that the mother or the father or the parents accepted, it's really out of line. And child marriage, you can imagine, even it's not even health-wise. You've seen where children get pregnant and it's difficult, the childbirth, they are not really of age and of maturity, and the child cannot consent. I was also looking very quickly, I'll jump into, somebody talked about albinism. I don't know whether you missed that. And especially on removal of organs. For us, there's no separation. So removal of organs and witchcraft, as long as, there are parts, it cuts across, whether it's an albino, whether it is a child, whether it is, I know that those cases were more prevalent also in Tanzania, for example. And in other places where people think that when you remove those parts, they bring good luck or whatever it is. So it cuts across. So I think I've done with my, how many minutes? Thank you. And thank you so much, everybody, for participating. I know we all have a role to play. I keep telling people, if you have a big mouth like I do, so you talk about trafficking, you can sing about it, you can tell your neighbor, go tell it on the mountains. And use your talent to join the fight, equip yourself with the knowledge and the information. That's a very starting point, and use your gifting and join the movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Olatunde?
Maybe he has to unmute.
Olatunde, could you unmute?
Yeah. Okay, all right. I don't recall you gave me specific questions. I hope I didn't miss any of them, if there were. But in the absence of such, just a couple of closing comments from me. I think Liberia has done very, very well. To respond in part to your early questions, your earlier questions, I will say that I think reporting in West Africa has gone up by far. While we report a lot better, and evidently from even this conversation, I think everyone would agree that there is a very active populace. Governments are doing quite a lot to address trafficking in persons, but the resources are just not there, generally speaking. Also, we need to do much better in building the capacities of first responders. But beyond all of that, I do think that there are connected systems we should be looking at, and governments and societies should be looking at. The systems will include social protection. I think the lack of social protection in most of our societies is perhaps the biggest challenge, the biggest obstacle to combating trafficking in persons. As Prof said, in relation to irregular migration, that people will say, well, I might as well be living dead, so why don't I take my chances on the high seas or through the desert? It's that same mentality often that you find even where people abuse children in child labor, and in some cases they extend to the worst forms. Now that is not that doesn't excuse the behavior of some people. The law should always take its course. There should be serious prosecution for such individuals, but we also need to very, very carefully start paying attention to good governance and how good governance produces social protection, the strengthening of child protection systems in our various societies as well. And these two systems, amongst other types of systems, are critical in all situations, even more so when you have a global pandemic like COVID. So those will be my, the last few comments I have. And then thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to Dora and the IDLO for pulling this together. Thank you.
Thank you, Olatunde. Anthony, Margaret?
Okay, thank you. My comment is that we, looking at domestic worker and especially around gender issue, we have good laws, but we need enforcement that the labor ministry, the minister is on this platform, that they should pay more attention to domestic workers who are working with people, and especially issue of trafficking come out of result from domestic work. People, they should take it seriously. People should be prosecuted so that it can serve as deterrence for people to stop violating women who are working as domestic workers, because most of the time people abuse them. We have good laws, the laws are on the book, we have good something, but we just need the enforcement, and we pray that we ask them to enforce. Also important to conduct trainings too for domestic workers, because sometimes they are working, they don't understand some of their rights, they don't understand some of the laws that are applicable to them, that can be able to protect them. So sometimes their rights are violated, they're being abused, they're being trafficked, they feel they have no remedy on the law. So it's important too to also create awareness, to talk to them, to educate domestic workers on the issue of the different laws, so that when they come across issues, they can be able to report them and be able to address them adequately. And to all the panelists and to IDLO, like I said before, I'm humbled to be part of this great panel to discuss this issue today. And I'm very grateful. And I ask everybody to keep safe wherever they are as we observe COVID as we in this period. So we look forward to implementing and paying more attention, keep working hard, applying all our efforts from the regional perspective, national, local, to be able to respond to trafficking issues in our different and respective countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Margaret, Deputy Minister, I found the two questions. So one question is about shelters in Liberia, whether we have shelters that provide support to victims of trafficking. The other question is, how can trafficking be eradicated when workers' organizations are not fully involved and educated to end TIP? And the last one, does the government of Liberia plan
time to respond? So let me begin by saying, yes, we do have shelters, but we have shelters with some level of gaps. So if you are trafficked and you are between the age of 0 to 12 years, happen to be trafficked and you are a female, there are shelters that we arrange for you to go to. If you are a trafficked and you're an adult, if you are trafficked but an adult male, we create, this is the response. So some days it's going to be a safe home that has had no person, maybe it was intended for a particular gender, but there's no one in it at all to place you there, or a commercial lodging facility with adequate security protection. So we are still working on the processes of having adequate shelter for male victims in our country. On the issue of the workers' union, yes, I'm doing the listing. We have had trainings for about 9 workers' unions, along with a grouping called Solidarities. So it included people from some of our largest workers' organizations like Firestone, APM Terminus, ArcelorMittal, etc. I'm sure ArcelorMittal, APM Terminus could be a misreading of the listing that I had. So we did do training for them. However, when it comes to the task force, they are represented by the umbrella body, the Liberia Labor Congress, which has again asked us to increase our outreach, and that we are going to do as soon as we are able to say that it's safe to do so. There are many trainings that we could not hold. For example, there was a plain training for over 30 journalists that had to be suspended, or plain training for about 30 labor inspectors that had to be deferred because of the case or the matter of COVID-19. So we want to say, from the standpoint of the government of Liberia, that yes, there is a problem that we have to face as a global community in fighting COVID-19. We want to give the assurance that Liberia is going to be, and we already are, an active, vibrant, and mature partner in ensuring that this court stopped and that countries, particularly ours, are able to properly protect their citizens. On that note, thank you all of my fellow panelists, to you, the host, Dora, and to the many listeners, both on Facebook and other forms of social media. It was good to have all of you. Thanks for your time. And hopefully when we meet again, we will have more updates to give you about progress that has been made. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, and thank you to all the panelists that have stayed with us till the very end. I know we have stretched our time, so thank you for being patient, and participants, thank you for being patient. This week, Thursday, is July 30th, the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. There is definitely going to be a celebration, a commemoration somewhere near you. So please participate, please engage in this conversation. The theme is very important. It sheds light on all the different first responders that are involved in the fight against trafficking. And I think Agnes said it, each and every one of us is a potential first responder. So keep your eyes out, keep your eyes open, and report any instances of trafficking in persons. For myself and the team here at IDLO, we say thank you for participating in this webinar. Stay safe and stay well. Thank you.